Thank you, Julian. Let me start by congratulating those of you whom I've seen from early in the morning today, who've stuck it out. Clearly highlights both the importance of the phenomena we're going to study, we're going to discuss, but also the energy that's behind all of the solutions that we will hopefully be discussing, have been discussing all along. We have an absolutely star-studded panel here, and I'm going to very briefly introduce some of them. Nick Hughes, to my immediate right. Nick is a walking case study, actually case studies in the plural, because at London Business School we teach a case on M-Pesa, the mobile money service. I see some heads nodding. You read it. That Nick started in East Africa, that transformed many communities in East Africa and has served as an inspiration for many others around the world. Nick then moved on. He's always on to the next big thing. That moved on to another initiative, M-Copa, which seeks to address the 600 million number that Alex Edmonds mentioned earlier today, which is the fact that so many in Africa in particular, but around the world, still lack access to energy, not just clean energy, energy. And now M-Copa, using some super cool technology, state-of-the-art in very many ways, addresses that challenge of energy. And Nick then moved on. Oh, by the way, that's another LBS case, which all our first-year MBAs do. And then we haven't written the case yet, but Nick's current venture is called Cavex, which I'm sure you'll talk about some more. Nick and I also teach a class called Innovating for Impact at London Business School. So Nick, welcome back. Antoinette, another dear friend of the school and of this particular community. Antoinette Vermillier is the co-founder with John Vermillier of the Gallifrey Foundation, which forces us in very many ways, partly through sheer force of personality, but partly through the vision and the importance of the phenomena, to look at areas that we often ignore, specifically the oceans and plastics and the oceans and the impact that this combination has on a whole bunch of other things. I'm sure Antoinette could tell us all sorts of scary statistics on that combination. The Gallifreys, Antoinette and John have been, the Vermilliers have, through their foundation, been wonderful supporters. I think we have at least one Gallifrey scholar here from the scholarship that they have endowed at London Business School. Antoinette, welcome. Gaurav Mehta, another case study. Gaurav runs a remarkable organization in India called Dharma Life. Dharma Life works in 14 states in India. Now, 14 states in India is the equivalent of, the particular states involved is the equivalent of all of Europe and the United States and a whole bunch of other countries. Yeah, one state alone is the size of Brazil. Yeah, so 14 states. And they work on rural entrepreneurship that has a social impact. And energy is one of the particular areas. But back to the point that was made in the earlier panel, that it's not just climate, it's a whole bunch of other things. And each of them recognizes and tries to address that in their own way from their vantage point. Now, the focus of the session is on emerging markets. We've heard emerging markets referred to many times. And so I'll start the conversation with just figuring out what's different about emerging markets. Very often the discussion is almost as if these are victims that, oh gosh, through our lack of empathy or care, we're causing victimization to all of these hundreds of millions or billions of people, or they're villains. Yeah? Either they're the oceans are rising and air is being polluted, or they're the ones cutting down the trees. They're the ones doing dirty coal, etc., etc. I suspect this group has a slightly different perspective from experience on emerging markets. So let me start with you, Nick, and then we'll go to the group as a whole. What is different in emerging markets, especially contemporary emerging markets, as we think about COP28?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Well, I'm a practitioner. Thanks for the plugs on the cases. But when I look at sub-Saharan Africa in particular, I actually see a huge opportunity in front of us to think about redesigning the infrastructure that we can deliver clean energy to the 600 million people that are simply off the grid. I mean, it's inexcusable that number of people cannot access grid technology today, and yet we have technology at our disposal which can solve for that problem. It's just, and I think the previous panel only caught a little bit of the conversation, but it boils down to inertia in the political systems, it boils down to financing. The practicalities of how we design that infrastructure need to be thought through. So we shouldn't go into Africa or other parts of Asia and start to think about centralized energy systems. I mean, that's crazy. If we landed on the planet today and looked around, both in terms of energy and in water, you would not design the systems that we use today. And in many ways, similar to M-Pesa, when we were thinking about M-Pesa, we were moving money around on phones 20 years ago, long before we had Apple Pay and iPay and smartphones, because we designed the solution for the person that just had a feature phone. We have to think about the way we design the next generation of energy systems for people that don't have the same needs that we've grown into over the last 200 years. Let's think about decentralized systems. Let's think about smart grids. I mean, there was a conversation earlier today about the rise of electric vehicles. I've been pestering the World Bank for decades to give me a business case for a smart grid. It doesn't actually happen because you don't have the anchor consumption to use the energy on a grid, and you can't get back your capital expenditure. But suddenly, we've got electric vehicles in the mix. Suddenly, we might have an anchor use case to roll out smart distributed grids properly. And so a smart grid is a grid where you come onto a grid, it's been installed, and maybe it's using clean energy at its source. So across Africa, there's more solar energy potential that we can actually use across the globe. There's geothermal energy, especially in East Africa, that's under the ground. It's clean to access. We could put that onto the grid. And the smartness comes when you pay for what you use. You don't just build a centralized system, push energy down. Load shedding is happening all across Africa. They simply don't know where to put that energy. The energy companies are only interested in what they're called C&I customers, the commercial customers. They're not interested in getting to households. We've got to jettison that thinking and design much more appropriate systems where they're smart, the energy is going to where it needs, and we give people the ability to pay for what they use using fair pricing. And so if you look into that, there's a whole, where sort of I'm grossly simplifying the opportunity because it's complex and it's hard and it needs money. But the opportunity is there for us to rethink the way we build energy systems. And we do need to start doing the talk earlier today about internalizing some of these external costs. We need to build in the pricing for the global south that gives them the incentive to move down this path. And I do think through mechanisms like the carbon markets, the global north and the polluters we should be finding ways to get that money from that source down to incentivize these new, cleaner, more cleverly designed infrastructure systems.
Great. So I'm hearing you say, the word you used a few times was opportunity, but then the infrastructure necessary to create the opportunity, as well as you alluded to the interconnected nature of the world. Yes. Perhaps that's a topic. Yeah. Antoinette, more generally, what is, as you look at developing countries, what do you find, what is your vantage point?
So today I've been here. By the way, thank you very much for having me, and it's really nice to be here and to have this audience. So I've been listening, and it's very much where we're looking at using technological solutions to solve problems, which is great, and I think it's very much needed, but we need to realize that in a very finite world, we're using more and more resources to do that. And in the end, where are we getting most of those resources? Those are from our emerging markets. And in addition to that, most of the effects of us doing that are actually affecting those countries more than us, because the effects of climate change are actually the consequence of extraction and of our industry in creating those technologies. So it's not, and again, going back to Alex and his externalities, it's really important that when we move forward, we are really considering how we move forward to solve a problem, that it is not solving one problem and creating others. And that's something that we are very, very involved with. You know, if you think about it, that indigenous people who comprise 4% of the world's population have been protecting 70% of the world's biodiversity. And so therefore, I'm more interested in how can we make nature-based solutions lucrative. And I hate saying that, I hate the word lucrative, but it's got to be an incentive that we are finding ways to work also with those kinds of solutions that, that can help solve the poly crisis. Because I think earlier, I think Julian was saying about the planetary boundaries, technically 6 have been crossed, scientists are, well, it's 7, and we've only got 2 left. So we really are running out of time. And so in that respect, when I'm looking at emerging markets, boy, we do describe them as the victims, but oh my gosh, I also work in areas where we are very closely in touch with people who are incredibly creative, come up with amazing solutions. But every day they are faced in the oceans. You can't go anywhere where your beach is not completely inundated with plastics. The fish that they are fishing is completely filled with plastics. They can't even sell some of it because it's polluted inside and out. So we have to be, so this is not just like it's them, it's all interconnected, and all of us have a role to play in that, and that's what I actually enjoy, is looking at where can we all start making those changes.
So I'm hearing you point on multiple levels to the externalities, so the negative effects that actions here or there might have on those communities that are not factored in. I'm also hearing you say something about the interconnections that exist. We might come back to that, and I'd love to learn more about the ocean context, which you're so closely involved in as well. Gaurav, your point of view on emerging markets. You left a career in finance in Europe to head to India and work in rural India. What do you see when you go to emerging markets? What is the reality?
So I think, make 3 points. I think the first one is actually a huge amount of inspiration towards this challenge. I think we can see good examples of emerging markets leapfrogging, versus our developed markets. I think the solutions you find, especially, I work in rural India amongst rural communities, and you can see, I think, how they actually adapt to the situation. In some cases, there are challenges, and we come to that later, but I think the innovation is amazing. And also the other thing you'll find is that traditional ways of operating or living were actually climate friendly. So actually these communities are much closer to what it used to be. And if you actually go back to, I think modernization leads to, modern things from Western countries seem exciting and aspirational to people, but then they are sometimes causes of these externalities at the village level. So, if you work with, if you go back to some of the, modernize some of the traditional methods of living, of kind of consuming, you will actually be able to be climate positive, neutral. And
what's an example?
Example would be, I can give an example. So I work on households, I work on micro businesses, and I work on communities. And in the micro business set, if you look at even, I'll take an example of art forms and art, right? I think we consume traditional art forms. So we looked at supply chains of traditional hand embroidery or traditional hand weaving. And if you go back to the traditional ways of doing this, it was all using natural ingredients and having circular processes. Now you are seeing using chemical paints, there's so many ingredients now which are, in the advent of massive scale up, being used everywhere, and they are being brought to these art forms, which destroys the kind of pureness of them and makes them environmentally unfriendly. And these are then sources of water pollution, waste creation, climate, air pollution because of energy usage.
And health.
And health, obviously, implicitly there's kind of other influences on the personal health and living conditions and working conditions. So I think that's one thing I'll mention. And quickly, the other thing would be, if you go back to that, the other thing I see is why I changed and wanted to make a difference was because it's sad to see what the situation is in a lot of cases. So it's hugely important to help these communities modernize and get what they're supposed to get. I mean, versus why should be, I think Nick, you mentioned it, why should they be off-grid? Why should they be? So I think there's the other side of it is that the poverty and the issues these communities face is also something which is a problem. So one has to find a way to solve that and have some sort of just transition.
Yeah. I heard you use the word modernize, and I also heard you use tradition. So modernize in a traditional manner somehow. Maybe we'll come to that. Great. Now, and all of that allude to some of the challenges. Maybe we could talk a bit about the challenges that you see. We've heard a lot about the need for finances, resources. What challenges do you see?
Question to me?
Yeah, or more anybody.
Yeah, sure. Where to start? So if we take the carbon markets I'll use that as an example. They've been around 20 years. I mean, before I got into the telecom space, I worked at BP. I went to COP6 in The Hague. And I came away from COP6 and I thought I'm never going to go to another COP. And weirdly, I find myself going back into these COPs now and talking about how we can use digital technology to solve for it. So what's the challenge with the carbon market is? It's a lovely economic concept. We'll create caps. We'll either put it in with a compliance cap or a tax, but allow people to offset that by finding somebody who's got some excess credits to save. That's a beautiful economic theory. How do you make that work in practice? And for 20 years, they bumped along, and we've seen market failure. They've disappeared over the last 3 to 4 months. Some of this outing of greenwash, where these flaky credits are getting sold. They're getting sold to brokers. The money doesn't make it to the projects. There's a much better way to run these markets. And again, I'm going to come back to digital tools. There are several things we can do now to ensure the integrity of a carbon credit. We've got remote sensing imagery that we can use to monitor oceans and mangroves and forests. We've got Internet of Things that you can't go anywhere on the globe and not be under a network somewhere, whether it's the GSM network, the mobile operators network, or it's Elon Musk is going to continue pushing out with his low orbit satellites. Connectivity is there. Data collection can be done. You can aggregate things on the cloud. You can interrogate remote data. Third parties can go right down to the very source of the activity that you want to attach a carbon credit to, whether it's a reforestation or protection of some mangrove, or it's displacing a petrol pump somewhere and putting in a solar installation. This is all possible, and we can. But the challenge is how do we build that monitoring infrastructure that gives us the evidence that the clean activity is happening? And if we can monetize it using carbon markets, we can use those micro incentives. So companies that are setting net zero goals and are using carbon markets properly, first of all, they should be reducing everything they can in terms of their own emissions. But if they need to use credits to get to net zero, then let's find a way to give them confidence to buy credits from the emerging economies and move that money down to the projects on the ground that are following a cleaner energy path. So, but it's hard to make that work. You need that blend of, you need some committed. I think the net zero, it's sort of the use of the net zero policy and companies signing up to it has been brilliant because it suddenly gives you buy-side demand.
And the regulations.
And the regulations need to come and enforce it. And I think if we can make those things happen, we can deliver those solutions using digital technology. There's no reason if I wanted to offset my journey into London today and move 500 shillings down to an M-Pesa wallet, I can do that. I can do it now. If I can give an incentive to a smallholder farmer to use a solar pump, there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to do that.
And yet we keep hearing about all these scams.
Yeah, exactly.
All of these phony carbon credits in emerging markets.
Absolutely. And that's again, that's inexcusable. We have technology to demonstrate the integrity of the activity on the ground, and we should use that technology wisely.
And just to make sure we are following, so can you give us an example? So I'm a farmer with a water pump.
Yeah.
what happens?
So
this is an actual
this is
case you're working on. You worked on. Yeah.
So typically you might go and spend, let's say $200. If you can borrow it probably from an MFI, you'll borrow $200, you'll buy a pump. You've got a choice as a smallholder farmer. Do you want a petrol pump? Or do you want to, those solar pumps look good, but it's it's $300, not $200. Okay, my running costs are low, but actually if I've got to find $300, why would I make that decision? Because cash is very real for me. I'm going to make the cheapest, I'm going to buy the petrol because I can get $200, I'll buy it now. If we said, you buy this, you take this solar pump, what you're going to get is a monthly credit to your M-Pesa account. Every single month you'll get, let's say 1,000 shillings, $10 to incentivize you to take that path, or we can use that to finance that pump for you. So there you're using small micro payments to incentivize the right choice between petrol pump or solar pump.
And the money for it is coming from the carbon credit?
Would come from, let's think of a big water company in the UK that's trying to get itself out of a dark corner, let's say Thames Water. I've got a net zero commitment, I've got to find 15,000 tons of credit. I like that, that's linked to water. Strategically, I can see the co-benefits exist for the farmer in terms of its clean water being used for irrigation. That's driving up socioeconomic benefit. I'll pick those credits. Give me the data that that's actually happened. We can complete that loop. Yeah.
And I can see why you started with the point about infrastructure, because all of this relies on financial infrastructure, communications infrastructure, exactly. Even in places where there is no road infrastructure.
That's exactly right. Yeah, we have this incredible digital infrastructure to use today.
Amazing. Yeah. Antoinette, back to the point about challenges you see. I already see the entrepreneur here coming up with solutions. It's a perfunctory nod to challenges, and we always go into the solution, which is awesome. Maybe you have a more sobering thought for us.
Well, I think I love listening because I'm like, oh yes, there's that and there's that. Absolutely, I totally agree. There are a lot of technologies that are being used and blockchain as well, which is super important to track the credibility of many of the things. But I just want to give a bigger picture of my worldview, which is a learning journey. So I don't know how many of you know here that plastics come from fossil fuels. I mean, they are basically a direct output of it. And because of the growth of the EV market, fossil fuel companies are now focusing on plastics as their next market, which is an estimated growth of up to 40% by 2050. And most of that, about 40%, goes on single-use packaging. So something that you get from your supermarket and literally use for a maximum of 5 minutes or have in your fridge for a week, that's it. And so what happens to those? Those get recycled, and I'm definitely using my ant hands, or waste to energy, which is another set of ant hands. And the reason is because we've learned and we've tracked, actually, I was just telling Rajesh that in Cromwell Road Tesco's, they put some trackers in for recycled goods, and they found them in Slovakia and in Turkey for open litter burning. So the point about recycling is it is a very open loop, and there are too many holes in it, and there's not enough accountability. Waste to energy is another thing, is where we take our plastics and we burn them in incinerators and say that they will feed energy. The problem with that is that we've discovered that the off-gassing are forever chemical products that are, even the WHO does not accept them. They're dioxins, furlans, PFAS, and these remain in the soil and in us forever. So we've got to sit back and go, hang on, where's the logic here? What are we doing? And the other point about it is that plastics are also contain endocrine disrupting chemicals. And Paul Rajesh has heard this 100 times, but basically at the rate that we're going, in the last 40 years, male sperm count has dropped 50% due to endocrine disrupting chemicals and is on track to hit statistical zero in about 20 years. Great news. So the point is that we're dealing with a product that is pretty foul and toxic, and we still keep using it, and we kill. So that's up here. This is where we are. What happens with all of that stuff is it gets exported to countries that are ill-equipped to deal with it in climate conditions that basically pour them into the ocean with every monsoon, extreme weather event, or whatever. So we're dealing with an issue that is social justice, social injustice, environmental damage, and human health damage. So what has been amazing for me, though, has been not so much that we can find solutions to deal with a problem that is a problem. We're just literally putting lipstick on a pig. What we really want to do is stop that. And so the ideal thing is to try and limit this fire hose of plastic production. There are some ways that that is being done, which is happening right now. In Kenya, at UNEP, there's the Global Plastic Pollution Treaty, where it's like the COP, but it's the COP of plastics. And we're trying to negotiate ways to basically address the plastics life from production to the end. That is amazing, because that has been driven and started mainly by people from countries that were the most affected by this. The Philippines, Indonesia, Africa, those were the countries that were driving so much of this. We've also passed something called the Basel Convention, which now regulates plastic as a hazardous waste. So you can't export it to another country without prior agreement. So these are huge steps forward, but they're more the legislative regulatory thing, because the market, the free market before then, only allowed for very unsustainable and untenable solutions. So in that sense, those are the things that I'm seeing on the regulatory stage. On the other thing, within communities, and I've often told Rajesh about this, is that there is one city in the Philippines. Basically, they tried an experiment where they got every stakeholder involved, and they had plastic-free ordinances targeting businesses. And all the people who were involved in plastic collection were reallocated to collect everyone's waste from their homes. And of that, 80% of the community's waste was diverted from being dumped in landfills. And it saved them $750,000 per year in landfill and transport costs. And the waste workers, which is a social justice issue, were treated as formal employees. So this became something that was one of those amazing stories where it was just a win-win-win and has kept going.
We'll come back to the point about oceans. What I heard also from you was the interconnected nature, going from Tesco to the Philippines or Turkey or Slovakia, the interconnected nature of this phenomenon, because the ocean surrounds us in part, but also supply chains surround us, whether they are supply chains that were originally designed as to be used a certain way or not. Gaurav, challenges, and I suspect you will come up with solutions as well, at least that's been the trend. So challenges that you see as you seek to make an impact on climate-related issues in emerging markets.
So I think for me, the biggest elephant in the room is the financing challenge. I think it's been talked about. The capital required to address some of these issues is huge. And it's not really clear how it will. I think we have a massive gap, and I think that's
we heard about $1 trillion and so on.
Trillions. I think it's more than that. But I think if I break it down to my context, which is the micro level, I mean, you would talk about how do you mitigate for. Imagine a rural farmer, female farmer in a village, a typical 1,000-household village. I mean, first they are asked to mitigate their footprint, which in the scheme of things is probably doesn't sound that much, but you aggregate it, it's a huge issue. Second, they have to mitigate they have to mitigate, but they have to become resilient, climate resilient. So they face the issues, I think, which are kind of caused by others, which they face in their crop, in their current water situation, etc. So they have to adapt basically their practices. And then maybe technology is there, hopefully there'll be solutions, but mostly that technology is still too expensive to finance for them, right? So these are the micro level challenges at let's say a single farmer, right, or farmer group at the village level. So not all of that can be addressed with its capital, its behavior change, its kind of mindset change. It is who will fund the loss and damages? Is there a loss and damage fund? There's talks about this, obviously at COP, but how do you bring it to that level? I mean, even reaching it to that level. We have the tools, we have the technology to do this, but it's a massive challenge. And I mean, how do you explain to that also? How do you explain that to them? I mean, like if you, so we're working with women entrepreneurs, we're trying to explain this. Yeah, in some cases it's very tangible, so easy to explain, but especially the things which don't have any immediate direct impact,
yeah.
you know, because mostly that's the case, or have any direct benefit or direct consequence, you know, require a lot more effort to explain why. And the fair question is, why should they be changing their behavior, whereas others have been allowed to develop?
Or require behavior change on their part when we're full of inertia. And
many issues, right, in terms of norms or even fairness. So justice becomes an issue as well, right? Fairness and justice. So I'm just, again, probably being on the borderline negative as well. But I think these are the real challenges. I mean, and not solutions comes next, so I'll honor your sequence.
and how are you addressing that challenge?
I think it's a work in progress. But basically what we've been doing is we've been trying to look at these failures, and I think some of them have clear solutions, and those get adopted. I think if I look at let's say the microbusiness, I'll go to the microbusinesses first. I mean, there's the solutions which are ROI positive, right? So whether it's, I think we've been looking at the big issue at rural level is wastage of foods, right? So a solar drying use case where you can dry is actually a very ROI positive use case. So these things then finance themselves, and so you can start with those. The solar pumps are also a good example in that context. Solar, because for micro irrigation, I think they're efficient solutions. Solar cooling is still borderline because the cost of solarized cooling. So you have basically three categories. One is things which are automatically ready adoptable, right? And because the ROI is positive, and you have models of financing which develop, and technologies which finance them with pay-as-you-go models. Then you have things which are, you need subsidy, you need an offset to actually make them. And again, there we come to the point of, can we create outcome payment solutions? Because the climate benefits, which Nick alluded to, they are not really translatable directly to that household. So you need an efficient access to carbon markets through technology. So using usage tracking, you know, maybe unique IDs through blockchain where you can track it back. And then to solve that, so that could be done, not the expensive impact bonds which are being propagated with 30-40% costs. You can do that with technology now. So that's the second category. And third one is where the use case is still experimental, where you don't know. I mean, there's a lot of innovation required on the tech side to solve the problem. And I mean, here, I mean, there's many examples, but that's kind of, we group it into these three, and then you can take it forward.
At least on the second, which is interesting, especially given the finance backgrounds of a number of folks here. I see Gul Mukhi, who's here, who's done a lot of work with impact bonds, etc. So the logic, if I understand, well, we're working on some research together with the Wheeler Institute and DL Labs on so-called results-based financing. Maybe you could talk a bit about how that links to potentially with climate change.
Yeah, so I think the simple way, if you have this financing gap, there could be two ways. Either it has to be subsidized or it has to be financed, and the cost of capital is an issue. So we are, I mean, creating a tech platform, and that's as an example, not a plug. It's just, you can just use very simple technology of image, AI-based image classification to prove that this household is the one deserving it. So you can validate the kind of targeting of such a household, which is most needy. Through technology, you can track the climate impact through sensors, where if only the usage gets paid. I think a lot of criticism of carbon markets is that you're survey-based paying out the carbon benefits. Here, technology allows you to actually track climate, footprint, and then paying out against the footprint through sensors. And the third thing is that you create a unique record that this thing is not duplicated. So this one household actually gets this benefit, business gets this benefit, and this is not repeated. And so you have some sort of trust in the process by creating a simple leaf ID on the blockchain. So that's a very simplistic way, and you can just price this directly. So I hope that answers.
Just relating to some of the points you've made, there are a series of questions coming through as well. I don't know if it's up there. There are questions coming through from the online panel. And one of them is Alex Edmonds talked earlier about the need for climate literacy. How do we achieve this in emerging markets? What does that even mean in the context? Lucrezia made a plug for this terrific webinar that she's organizing on behalf of the Wheeler Institute on climate standards and Africa. What about on the grassroots of those who are not dialing in, the folks, the smallholder farmer or that community member in the Philippines or the village, rural Indian villager? What does climate literacy even mean in those contexts? Antoinette?
I think they're living it. I think they see it every day. If you're on a coast, you're seeing front line the amount of plastics that are hitting your shore. You're seeing the fact that the weather is getting much more extreme. There are countries that are going underwater right now. And it's not just, again, carbon tunnel vision. These are countries that are not just losing their land, they're losing their culture, their spiritual connection. This is much bigger. When I hear this, I think that we talk about climate literacy. That's because we're so disconnected. I think that when you are front line, you know full well what the changes are, and you're having to cope with them front line, and particularly in coastal areas.
This is, I was in my home state in India, Kerala, a few weeks ago, and the person who was cooking at this little hotel we were in by the beach was a fisherman, it turned out. And we said, so what are you doing here instead of fishing? Apparently that beach used to go 3 kilometers out. In my home state, I had no idea. And to him, it's very palpable, and his children are not becoming fishermen anytime soon. They are doing other professions, and so they see the way the world is headed from their particular initial unique perspective. And is that enough?
I think obviously there are, all of us, when we start looking at the interconnectedness of what we're doing, you can sit there and say, well, maybe the way that they dispose of waste, or maybe the way, there are changes. But I think that within villages, and we've learned this, that when you work with the elders in a village, they are super important in educating their communities on better ways. And that's probably it actually started with Al Gore with his climate talks, educating, you just keep going down till you get to the point where there is that level of education and literacy. But the level of literacy that you need there is probably quite different to global financial markets or whatever, which are too disconnected. That's where I think the biggest...
True, but I was thinking, Nick, of your example of the smallholder farmer at the pump. That farmer needs to trust that you will keep giving the 10 pounds every month. Yeah. And so at some level, the farmer needs to understand that there's somebody out there who has a stake in whether he or she uses the pump in a certain, a particular kind of pump or not. And so there needs to be some, at least implicit understanding of cash flows and so on.
Yeah, really. But remember what you're doing. If you're getting 1,000 shillings or $10 a month to a smallholder farmer, the benefit of that is huge. This is the strange thing about carbon markets. You've got a dollar currency, and if I'm Thames Water and I'm buying, I'm not picking on Thames Water, but if I'm Thames Water, if £10 or $10 per ton to me, if I'm chasing 20,000 tons per year to hit my net zero, I need to understand that, as a finance director, I'm making decisions about, do I buy now at this price and at this volume, and there are other things I might want to think about, like these co-benefits. That's a different type of literacy to a smallholder farmer who's getting $10 a month. $10 a month is going to drive that, that's what makes the difference. $10 a month is real income to a smallholder farmer. And it might sound like we're fiddling around the edge, we're talking about one smallholder farmer or one household, but there are literally hundreds of millions of people like this. And we have to think about how do we create that at an aggregated level. Then you start to see a material shift. But I would say bring it back to money. Bring it back to some money in the wallet of that smallholder farmer, or money in the wallet of that household that displaces their charcoal burning. Because there's also health issues linked there, and they're getting an incentive payment to move across to clean energy. And when you start to multiply that by hundreds of millions of people, then you start to make a little bit of a dent on the challenge. And it can all be done, I think, in the short term. Longer term, we're going to need bigger solutions. We're going to need direct air carbon capture. We're going to have to be pulling literally millions or hundreds of millions of tons of carbon out of the atmosphere. We don't have the technology to do that yet, but we do have the capability and the systems to do this at big scale, to do this sort of short-term stuff that brings socio-economic impact. And if we link it to money, link it to real money in their wallet every month, that's what will drive behavior change.
Now, Gaurav, behavior change, you're involved in lots of activities at the grassroots level that is around behavior change, some of which is around climate, or at least the environment.
Yeah, I think definitely it's needed, I think at different levels. I think at the individual level, I think the government of India's Mission Life is a good example where there's a policy-driven or prime minister-driven initiative to get people to live in a climate-friendly way, which I think is not only an educational tool, it's also kind of creating a movement towards changing your mindset to actually save water, reduce plastic, all these, I think 6, 7 behaviors they've outlined, and I think it's a great example of a top-down, kind of movement. It still will have to yield results, but I think it's definitely required. And secondly, I think at the business, micro-business level, and just adding to what Nick said, I think obviously the benefits, passing on the benefits will help, but I think there it's about pivoting and iterating the business models, where I think the education would be around, can you help them actually have a future-proof business model, and the education would be around that and using tech and other things to do this, because it will have to all pivot and iterate.
I see we have 2 minutes and 14 seconds, so I'm going to wrap by asking you a question. So throughout the day we've heard, and Antoinette did a particularly good job of reminding us of all of the challenges, everything from sperm counts to all of the awful stuff that's happening in the oceans. It all sounds kind of depressing. Although you've done a remarkable job of giving us some, solutions and reasons to be optimistic. What keeps you going in this? Where it seems like there are so many thousands of players involved, not just at COP, but much beyond. It seems like these are such big problems with all of these interconnections and all of these externalities. What keeps it can seem futile sometimes, perhaps. What keeps you going?
Yeah, it does feel like it sometimes, doesn't it? But look at how the world responded to COVID. Look, we shortened the R&D time, by decades, and brought solutions out that have helped. And we can have big debates about that. But I think humans I am an optimist. I do think we'll find solutions. I think we are, as a race, we can be quite ingenious when we need to be. But just on a pure business basis, by 2050, 1 in 4 adults on this planet will be on the African continent. As a business opportunity, why aren't we thinking, okay, that sounds exciting. 1 in 4 adults on the planet will be in sub-Saharan Africa. If we're not investing now in good solutions, smart solutions for Africa, then we're not doing our job in a business context.
Yeah, so big problems mean big opportunities.
Yeah. I think so.
And you see that. Antoinette, what keeps you going?
I think it's, the fact that everyone's here in this room. It's the everyone is engaged in one way or another. So I think I get my hope from action. I hate just not doing anything, and all of us can do something. If all of you just left today and said, I'm going to do something today, that's one thing. The other thing is high-level action. That's what I look for.
Gaurav, you've had 2 hours of sleep, and this is not frequent, I know this, and you're working non-stop on these things. I'm just amazed at the level of energy you put in. What keeps you going?
I think it's always a question of perspective, or from which perspective you're looking at it. I think for me, it's working for the women entrepreneurs in the village. If you see the challenges they face, I think the unpredictability and issues they have, I think it's just a tiny thing for us to keep going. It's a responsibility, it's a duty. It's an honor to be able to do this. So as long as you can do it, and that's what keeps me going. And it's always a question of perspective.
Thank you. On that note of duty, let's all do our duty, and I'll do my duty and end on more or less on time. Thank you.